The World Junior Summer Showcase is underway, taking place at the campus of the University of Minnesota from July 25th to August 2nd. Canada, Finland, the USA, and Sweden will be participating in the event, which serves as an evaluation for players eligible for the big show on Boxing Day in Minneapolis. We'll be focusing on Team Canada today and how they can avenge consecutive quarterfinal exits at the World Juniors. We will also be providing a brief overview of Team Canada's roster for the Hlinka-Gretzky Cup, which is set to take place from August 11th to 16th in Czechia and Slovakia. Gentlemen, it's an exciting few years for the country with some superstar talent wearing the Maple Leaf in these tournaments. There have been some wholesale changes at Hockey Canada lately. I'm excited to dive into it all, but first of all, Derek, Brock, how are you guys doing today?
Doing good, Kyle. How you doing, man?
I'm great. I'm really excited to have you guys on. Derek, how's the summer been so far?
It's been good. It's been nice to get my 5 minute break away from hockey and scouting between the draft and then the Hlinka-Gretzky Cup coming up. So, enjoying it as much as I can, and but still missing the hockey side of things. So, also excited to get back to it. I feel a little naked, with that when I'm not scouting and doing the work.
Yeah, it didn't take long for me to get bored and want to recruit you guys for another video. And Hockey Canada always has a busy summer, and there's lots to go over, and people are ready for the events that are taking place a long time in the future, like the World Juniors. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is the fact that Canada has decided to hire a GM for the program of excellence, overseeing the U20, U17, and U18 levels. It's an unprecedented move. Obviously, Alan Millar brings a lot of experience, and he's made a big move right away by hiring Dale and Mark Hunter to oversee the World Junior team. So, how do you guys feel about the changes going on at Hockey Canada in general? Do you think this marks kind of radical change, or just they're noticing the complaints that people have been having in the country?
I think just the aim here is to find consistency. I think that's what it should do, right? Like you've got Alan Miller coming in who should bring that consistency across the U20, U18, U17, and younger levels of Hockey Canada, making sure that basically everything is up to par and things are going the way that they should be. And from a strategical perspective and from a scouting perspective, everybody's sort of on the same page. And then you bring in the Hunters to run the World Juniors, which I think is the absolute perfect choice after what we saw last year. And I think that gives Canada a really good chance to rebound after some disappointment.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Brock said. It feels like it's been overdue, honestly, just because there has been too much inconsistency. One year Canada looks amazing, by far and away best team in the tournament, and then you get instances like last year where there's nothing. They don't gel, they completely underwhelm, they underperform, they never really find their footing at all. And it's just such a dramatic difference from one year to the next. And it shouldn't happen. When you've got that much talent, you need to have a more clear structure in place. You need to have more expectations for the players as to what their roles are going to be, what the systems are going to be, and how it's all going to work. And just when you're changing coaches every year, it just makes it a lot harder because you already have to deal with the change in players every year. There's barely any guys that come back. So just having that consistency with the management and the coaching staff, I think is going to go a long, long way.
I'm curious, just do you think there will be any big changes in terms of, I think last year we saw guys left off the roster due to kind of off-ice stuff, or they basically just weren't necessarily using a best player available mentality when selecting the roster. And I found when the last time the Hunters were in charge, it was a pretty good balance of, they had guys slotted in with roles in mind, but they let a guy like Alexis Lafreniere work his way up the lineup and earn his spot as one of the most talented players available, regardless of his age. So, just with the amount of young talent coming in, I'm curious, how do you think the selection process will go this time around?
I mean, I think it has to go that way. You have to get away from just having clearly identified roles for players entering camp and then selecting players based on, those sort of pigeon-held roles. You take the best players available and you trust that these guys can play any role that's asked of them when they're representing their country. These are talented young hockey players who a lot of them are still trying to carve out their own identity on the ice anyway. So there's an opportunity for them to show what they're made of, for lack of a better term, right? These guys are going to be willing to put in the work to play any role that's asked of them. Any of the players selected can be that Swiss Army knife. And I think, like you said, the Hunters, I think the last time they took over, they do a good job of selecting that roster. And I think you kind of got to get away from the old adage that this is a 20-year-olds tournament, right? I think that talent wins, regardless of age. And yes, it is harder for younger players to be extremely successful at this event. But as we saw with Matthew Schaefer before he got injured at the most recent World Juniors, the most exceptional talent, the highest end of talent, is going to be able to, play an important role at this event, regardless of their age.
I think you still need to have a balance. I think there's still going to be some semblance of roles, but you can't go too heavy into it. I think the problem mostly with Canada last year was you had guys that weren't playing in roles that made sense a lot of the time. One example being Oliver Bonk starting on Canada's top power play unit, even though he wasn't playing the points on the power play in London. There was a lot of usage of guys that didn't make sense. But I think that will be counteracted a lot by the fact that you're going to have more consistency with the management and the coaches. So they'll know the players better and know what kind of jobs they can handle. Because you're still going to need guys that will be able to kill penalties or handle tough defensive matchups as a center, that sort of thing. But to Brock's point, yeah, I think you also need to bet on skill. You can't just, you know, pick a guy because he's necessarily a little bit older because he was there last year. You really do need to rely on the talents that's there and make sure that talent has a job on the team that makes sense. And with the Hunters, I mean, they're not afraid of playing younger players. I mean, last year Sam Dickinson was a top four defenseman for London all the way through their playoff run. Easton Cowan had a great playoff run and played a big role as a 17-year-old on that team. So they're not going to be afraid of a guy like a Gavin McKenna or a Landon DuPont and giving them a big role if they earn it on the team, even though they might be younger than some of the other guys that are there.
Yeah, there was a quote that came out, I think it was Dave Cameron, in regards to Martone and McKenna, and he said, "We don't check birth certificates." Um, and I think that that quote got people excited. It maybe didn't end up being that true in execution, but I will just say with the Hunters, they do a really good job of, yeah, wiping away how old everyone is and looking at the player and how ready they for the role. And I think that just comes with experience, and that's something that the Hunters do not lack whatsoever. So, taking a look at the roster, I've highlighted the returnees in yellow. I've just listed kind of the top names by each position. So, starting in net, Carter, George, and Jack Ivankovic. I think they're a lock to return. They were great last year. Joshua Ravensbergen was a late cut, I believe. I don't see the goaltenders going any other way than those three. I think there's quite a drop off in the talent pool. Do I need to ask you guys about that?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think the question would be, who ends up being the starter. And I think that just depends on the kind of season that these three gentlemen are having when it comes time to pick this team. You ride with the player that's playing the best. You ride with the guy that's, playing the best through camp. I think realistically next year, you probably have a situation which Canada has run into in previous years where goalies sort of split the round robin games, and then, the best performer gets chosen to play the medal round.
I mean, that's the way it should be, in my opinion. I think that's been the most success that Canada's had at their goaltending in recent years has been that kind of strategy. I would also say that, goalies are pretty unpredictable at this age still. There might be someone else that has a really hard start to the year, continues hot into December, and maybe knocks out like a Ravensbergen who can be streaky, or maybe if Ivankovic doesn't have a strong start to his NCAA career. I can't think of any names off the top of my head for the guys that could come in as a surprise netminder, but with goalies, it's always a possibility. But I would say that, yeah, I mean, with George and Ivankovic having experience at this tournament already, I would say it's pretty safe to pencil them in as 1A and 1B.
Yeah, I think they bring, not only do they bring experience and success at previous levels, but they were some of the best players on their teams at Hlinka U18, U17. And I think it's just very comforting for Canadians to be able to look at two goalies with such a good track record that were also on the team last year and have, gone through the trials and tribulations, experienced heartbreak. It was not easy for either of these guys to be at the end of some of those, at the receiving end of some of those historic losses for Canada. I think the biggest question with the defense is which of these guys will be available. So Sam Dickinson, Matthew Schaefer, Zayne Parekh, do you foresee any of them being in the NHL during this tournament?
Potentially. I mean, Parekh has played in the NHL already. The Flames really, really like him. They're, as far as I can tell, they're going to give him a really good look in training camp. They have a lot of depth on their blue line and in the AHL right now. So it'd be hard for him to kind of be given a spot. He'd really have to earn it. But I think it's there. I think there's really a chance for it to happen, especially since he doesn't have a lot to prove at the OHL level anymore. And I think you could say the same thing about Sam Dickinson, which I'm sure Brock will touch on. But I would say that Schaefer's probably going to be back. At least I certainly hope so. I mean, for a guy who is still so young, and who missed so much time in his draft year. I mean, he's a guy who needs to be playing minutes. This is such an important time in his career for development. I mean, it's not to say he wouldn't develop in the NHL if he sticks with the Islanders, but I just think it would serve him really, really well if he went back to the OHL and played, a million minutes a night for Erie, and then came in and kind of got his revenge a little at the World Juniors after being knocked out so unfortunately last year.
Yeah, I agree with what Derek said. I think Parekh probably has the best chance of being in the NHL. I would have said Dickinson, but San Jose loaded up on veterans and now sort of have what looks to be a fairly set roster on the back end, sort of allowing them to take their time with Dickinson. I mean, obviously, he could still push for a spot. They could make trades, they could waive guys, but it does seem like they're kind of entering camp with that mindset. I would expect all three to probably play an NHL game or two before going back, unless there's some sort of plan in place for them to go the NCAA route. Whether a program is holding a spot for one of them, it gets tricky because when you get to a certain point, these guys have to be enrolled. These guys have to be eligible to play this year. So obviously they can't sign an NHL deal as well. So a guy like Schaefer. Um, that's going to be sort of a tricky sort of thing for to them, the Islanders, to navigate sort of what the plan is there. That said, I think all three will be available for Canada at the World Juniors. I do think so. I think that even if Parekh makes Calgary, he's probably going to be used in sort of a sheltered, even strength role, utilized on the power play. We've had other guys over the years um, be loaned to Canada who are in those sort of sheltered roles just to get them more ice time. Could have sort of helped with their development, and then they go back to the NHL right after that. So yeah, I do expect all three to be eligible and available for Canada.
That is ridiculous when you think about it. I mean, Dickinson, Schaefer, Parekh, guys all on that borderline, but I agree with you. I don't think any of them will be in the NHL full time next year, or yeah, definitely not playing a significant role. But like, that's scary. Those are three players with, I mean, Schaefer, albeit being shortened, a shortened season, like three of the best seasons we've seen in recent times in the OHL for defensemen. Like, what are they going to do next year? Especially like Dickinson just won CHL Defenseman of the Year. I think Schaefer, you can say he hasn't played a lot. Parekh, maybe there's some clear warts in his game that it's like, okay, you can go back and work on those and you're still going to get 120 points. But what does Sam Dickinson need to work on at the junior level next year? And how good do you think he could be for Canada?
Well, I mean, that's why in the most recent CBA, right? That's why they've made this adjustment to allow exemptions for 19-year-olds to play in the AHL because there are guys that you worry are going to plateau because they've hit a point where there are less things for them to work on in the CHL. I don't like using the term that there's nothing for them to improve on. There are things that Dickinson and Parekh and Schaefer can continue to improve. But I think they'd be better suited in proving those things at the pro level. So that's why that amendment is a good thing. It's, the CHL will survive. I know that people sort of there's been a lot of doom and gloom surrounding the CHL this offseason based on the NCAA stuff, based on the newest installment of the CBA. But the CHL will adjust. There will remain talented players. They're not losing every high-end 19-year-old. Not every NHL team is going to put their 19-year-old or top 19-year-old prospect in the AHL because at the end of the day, they want them to play. So if there's a spot for them to play top six or top six forward ice time, top four defensive ice time, a spot on the power play for them. Yeah, they're going to give them that challenge. But if they're in a loaded system where there's not much room at the AHL level either, there's no point to them playing fourth line AHL minutes when they could be in the CHL playing 30 minutes a night. So I think we're still sort of waiting to see how all this sort of shakes down. I mean, there's always things guys can work on. I don't know if I ever agree with a player being completely, if I ever agree with a player not having any value in terms of them returning to the CHL.
Yeah, they're not gonna go in the opposite direction. They're not gonna get ruined by going back to the OHL or the C or whatever CHL league. I can't think of any prospect where that's happened to, but it has happened in the other direction, where guys have gone to the NHL too early and it has seriously hurt their development and they have never recovered. There are many examples of that happening. So I do like this new rule coming up where there are some guys who in their individual cases, they're best move development wise is to be at the AHL level, where they're probably done with the OHL or the WHL or the Q, but probably not quite ready for the NHL, especially if they're not getting ice time. And the AHL makes perfect sense for them. It's not everybody. It's not going to be the majority of guys. It's only going to be a select few who can really handle it every year. Your Dickinsons and your Pareks. Um, but I think it's the right thing, and it sucks for the CHL and their three main leagues, but they'll be okay. The league will survive. There's still going to be a lot of talent coming through. The league will adjust. But at a certain point, you have to do what's best for the players. And I think this new rule is going to be the best thing for the players who go through it.
Yeah, I'm being hyperbolic about Dickinson, and I didn't even mean to bring up the whole conversation about where he could play. I just mean thinking about the idea of playing for London again. And you know that, yeah, there's tons of things San Jose is going to have him working on, he's going to be focused on, but it's like if he wanted to on a Wednesday night against one of the lower end teams, Sam Dickinson's could score 4 or 5 goals. And that's just crazy to think about next year and what he's going to look like. And certainly you don't want to risk um, sending a player up when they're not ready. But looking at the rest of this Team Canada defense core, I'm curious, how do you see the rest of it filling out just in terms of, you can't all be like Schaefer's, Dickinson, Parekh kind of. Although we're talking about picking the best player available, I think there will probably look at a guy like Harrison Brunicke. But I'm interested how you see like the bottom pairing filling out. Like, do they go for a DuPont or a Verhoeff, or do they go for some size, experience, shutdown ability, something to foil the other talented guys at the top of the decor?
I mean, it's hard to say this far out. There's certainly going to be some good contenders. I mean, Harrison Brunicke is a really interesting name. He's a guy who already has AHL experience under his belt. He's going to be playing a ton of minutes for Kamloops in the WHL at the start of the season. A guy who's going to be playing power play and penalty kill, offensive roles, defensive roles. Like, he's going to be doing a lot for that team. So Canada should have an easy time slotting him in anywhere. I wouldn't be surprised to see Kashawn Aitcheson on the roster, just because with this tournament being in the States, down in Minnesota, there's going to be some big spirited games. They're going to be physical. They're going to be intense. I think Canada will need a little bit extra of that on their blue line, and Aitcheson certainly can bring it with the physical play and a bit of like an exuberant attitude that can kind of fire up the boys on the bench. I think Canada will want to have that kind of element on their blue line.
Yeah, Aitchison was the name that I was going to mention. I'd be shocked if he's not part of that, either a solid number four or in the third pairing. Just knowing the Hunters and how they like to play and how they like to sort of utilize their defenders. I would be shocked if Aitcheson isn't somebody that is sort of not a lock, but has a very, very good chance of being on that team. And maybe a guy like they look at a guy like DuPont or Verhoeff, sort of as like a seventh defender. But the reality is, if you've got Schaefer, Dickinson, and Parekh available to you, you don't need a seventh defender to be offensively oriented. Um, that's already sort of in place. You don't need to take a guy who's going to be a power play specialist. You don't need to worry about the puck being moved well. The transition game is going to be great, especially if you split up those three guys across the three defensive pairings. So I think that probably puts a guy like DuPont or a guy like Verhoeff at a sort of disadvantage. When you look at the makeup of this team and knowing how the Hunters like to play, they'd probably be more likely to take a big body who can sort of kill penalties, take some pressure off guys on the penalty kill and eat up big minutes there. Maybe not so much at even strength, but on the penalty kill, so that Team Canada doesn't have to, give huge minutes to guys like Schaefer.
Moving on to the forward group, they're getting quite a bit of significant returnees. Berkeley Catton, Gavin, McKenna, Porter Martone. That could be your top line right there. Obviously, they've played together at previous levels. Jet Luchenko will be back. Cole Baudouin, I think you can slot in right at the third or the fourth line center. But I think even more impressive, perhaps, than the returnees is the amount of talent they have available to them that wasn't there like last year. Guys like Michael Misa, TJ Ginla, Beckett Seneca, Liam Greentree. So, yeah, I'll start with you, Derek. How do you see this forward group as a whole? And I'm wondering if there's anyone here listed that you see could make this roster that I don't have down.
There's a lot to like, that's for sure. I think we're going to see some very motivated players amongst the guys who were there last year, like McKenna, Martone, Baudouin, guys who obviously didn't have the experience they were hoping for, the results they were hoping for last year. So I would certainly expect them to be a little extra fired up. One name maybe to look out for is Michael Hage, who kind of gets forgotten about sometimes when it comes to discussions about some of the top prospects out there. He had a great debut season at the NCAA level. He was great with Chicago the year before in his draft year. I mean, he's a guy with some size and some athleticism. He can play center. He's a good shooter and puck handler and playmaker. There's a lot of variety and utility to his game. He's a center who also shoots right, which can be really nice to have for certain draws. I would be surprised at this stage if he didn't make it, especially because he is playing NCAA hockey already, playing against a lot of these American guys who are going to predominantly come from the NCAA. So I would say that he's a name that you would want to watch out for.
Yeah, and I mean, knowing the Hunters, I'd be shocked if Brady Martin isn't a bottom six guy for this team. I think that based on how he played at the U18s, Hockey Canada's definitely circled his name as somebody they expect to come into camp and win one of those sort of like traditional energy checking line roles. Probably be one of the team's top penalty killers, and somebody that the Hunters could sort of use as a Swiss Army knife. So yeah, I think he'll be a name that pushes forward. And ultimately, when you've got the Hunters in charge, your performance at camp and your intensity at camp is going to go a long way as to whether you make that roster. They're not going to care about draft slot or NHL hype. If a guy comes into camp and that physical intensity level isn't there, they're not going to play for the Hunters. We see that in London all the time. If you're not committed to both ends of the ice, if you're not physically intense, you're not going to play for the Hunters. So I think they're going to take that same sort of mentality to this year's World Junior team. If you're not bringing it from, a physically intense viewpoint, you're not making that roster. So there are some guys that, are going to be sort of on the outside looking in because of that, because that's just not their game. So you do wonder if there'll be some higher profile cuts just with the Hunters taking over. But we'll see. I mean, that's the difficult part about projecting the roster this far out.
And especially with this kind of tournament, like I touched on before, like it's in the United States. We just saw a very spirited Four Nations event with some, classic games between Canada and the US. Like the players and the coaches, they're going to know the assignment. There's going to be a lot of eyes on this tournament. The intensity is going to be high. The expectations are going to be high. They're going to be physical games. And the Canadiens are going to know that the Americans are going to bring it physically every shift and in every game they play against Canada. So the Hunters are going to want to have guys on the Canadian side who can dish it right back. And like you said, Brock, like Brady Martin's going to be one of those guys who will will be well suited to that kind of challenge.
It's a question every year, probably at every level of Canadian hockey, even, America, when you have this many top centers. I'm just curious, like, who do you think, is there anyone right now that you're just like, okay, they're going to stick at center? Because like a guy like Caden Lindstrom, we haven't even mentioned yet, Michael
Mhm.
Hage, Caleb Desnoyers. I don't know, right off the top, I feel like Michael Misa will probably shift to the wing. He's played a lot there, but then again, you could say he's been so good at center.
I mean, yeah, Canada will have options. They'll have a lot of guys who are playing center with their club teams, and uh, that'll make it easier for them. You might even see a setup where you have a left shot center and a right shot center on each line, just to have some advantages when it comes to where faceoffs are on any given shift. So, you might have a guy like Michael Hage be the right wing on the second line, but he takes a lot of faceoffs on the right side when he gets those opportunities. So, I mean, you look at someone like Jet Luchenko; he's a really solid two-way player. I would see him being predominantly a center. Berkeley Catton, if he is there and he's not in the NHL with Seattle, I mean, he's one of the biggest superstars at this age group. He's been a really strong center in the WHL who's also handled a lot of tough defensive responsibilities, even though he's not the biggest of guys. So if he's there, I think you could probably pencil him in as the number one center. But like I said a minute ago, Canada's going to have a lot of options and they'll have some flexibility with how they want to deploy their forwards.
I just want to take a moment and talk about the I don't know what's the word, the prestige of this team. I mean, it's often the case, but just taking a look at the forwards, I think every single one, Gavin McKenna, obviously projected first overall pick next year, but Ryder Ritchie was a second round pick. Malcolm Spence was a second round pick. Did Justin Carboneau go first round?
Mhm.
Okay, so other than that, that's all first round picks you're looking at in your forward group. And I want to move on and highlight a couple guys, Gavin McKenna and Porter Martone, who were at last year's tournament. I think looked good in glimpses. Porter Martone was especially like just underutilized, not really having a regular spot in the lineup. But they're two guys I think are going to bring a lot to this team, as well as Berkeley Catton. Um, Gavin McKenna at the 2024 U18s was playing on a line with Porter Martone, and he had 10 goals and 20 points, which is the most ever in a single tournament by a Canadian. And then in the same tournament, since he played the year prior, Porter Martone, Canada's all-time top scorer and assist leader at the tournament with 23 points, 15 assists, and 14 career games. Obviously, they won gold. I just wanted to highlight that, and it's been two really disappointing performances at the World Juniors for Canada. But the age groups that are coming up that are World Junior eligible now are exceptional. And we're going to talk about the Hlinka, the U17s. Canada won gold as well. So it's a very, very promising time for this country. And yeah, I'm just curious what you guys think about McKenna and Martone. Do you think those guys will be kind of the offensive catalysts? I think we also talked about there's a lot of offensive capability on this blue line.
Yeah, I think that's going to be it. I think this team will be really strong in transition. I think there's going to be a lot of speed. The defense is going to be incredibly aggressive, I think, just based on the identity that they're going to be able to play, especially with likely some of the best goaltending in the tournament. So they're going to be able to play that way and really take the fight to the other team and be incredibly aggressive. So I think that, yeah, it's hard to say. Like, I don't know. I don't know if you can really put an identity to this team yet, but I do think that McKenna and Martone are going to be sort of in the middle of it.
I would also expect McKenna to maybe not receive the warmest welcome from other teams once he starts playing games in the NCAA, just because there's so much hype around him, right? There's been so much discussion about the rule changes and the his decision about what team to go to. Like he's going to get a lot of attention from other teams once he hits the NCAA level, and a lot of the guys he's playing against are going to be on this American roster come December. So I think that's going to be an interesting storyline to kind of follow at the NCAA level through the first few months of the season. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how that carries over into the World Juniors as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight those guys just to give Canadians that aren't overly familiar with them at the junior level, like they were there last tournament, but they were a shell of themselves, and they're going to be hungry. It's going to be the last time they're going to have a chance to play for Team Canada at the World Juniors in all likelihood. So, yeah. So, moving on to the Hlinka roster, the first thing I wanted to highlight is could you just give me some context? Obviously, it's early days, but we know how promising of a prospect Gavin McKenna is. People are talking about Verhoeff now as, more of a challenger than perhaps once thought. And then could you just talk about Gavin DuPont? Or do you think those prospects are all in the same stratosphere, or are you able to kind of differentiate them already?
Derek, I'll let
Uh,
you handle this one since DuPont and Verhoeff are right in your backyard.
Yeah, so that's Keaton, Verhoeff, and Landon DuPont, two of the defensemen who are most likely going to be on this Hlinka roster coming up. And it's hard sometimes to compare them to other players that have come through, or where guys like McKenna are now, because these guys are still pretty young. They're 16 in some cases, and they're just entering their draft year, with the exception of DuPont, is actually a year younger. So, but you can kind of look at trends. You kind of see where guys are at that age group and get excited. I mean, Verhoff was one of the best defensemen in the WHL this season. Just a phenomenal, phenomenal rookie campaign as a 6'4" right shot defenseman who moves well, who thinks the game well, who can handle the puck really well. He's got a great shot from the point. I mean, he's the type of defenseman that coaches kind of dream of because he can do anything out there. I mean, he doesn't have necessarily a mean streak to his game yet, but that can still come. But there's just so much to love about his game, and I don't think it's just a media made talking point that this guy could be a legitimate challenger for Gavin McKenna at first overall, because he's a guy who could be a true number one defenseman at the NHL level if his development keeps going at its current trajectory. So he's going to be a big name to watch for sure. And if everything goes, as expected this year with him, if he can really utilize all of his talents, I mean, this is a guy who should go first or second, probably second, because McKenna has, a lot of superstar power, but Verhoff is the real deal. And then, there's already talk about the year after the 2027 draft, and that's looking like it's going to be the Landon DuPont draft. He played in the WHL this past season as an exceptional status player, as a 15-year-old predominantly, and he was fantastic. Like one of the best defensemen in the league, even though he was 2, 3, 4, 5 years younger than a lot of the guys he was playing against. He was very, very good and a very key player on a very good Everett Silvertips team. Um, he's still got a long way to go physically because he's still so young, but just a tremendous skater, exceptional hockey sense, fantastic with the puck. There's a lot of like Erik Karlsson to his game if you wanted to compare him to someone in the NHL. Just, a budding superstar. I think he's going to be on this team. He should be, just based off of what he's done so far. And, when you talk about a good problem to have with the Canadian coaches, because you've got two guys on the blue line who can eat up a ton of minutes, and they're both right shot defensemen. And we haven't even talked about some of the other impressive right shot defensemen that are going to be here as well. So it's going to be a very exciting tournament to watch, especially for the Canadian blue line, because there are some very, very talented players. And on paper, it might even be one of the best defensive groups that we've ever seen for Canada at this tournament.
Yeah, taking a look at the players that received A grades in our 2025 McKeen's Hockey NHL Draft Guide for the 2026 NHL Draft. Ethan Belchetz, the big winger from Windsor, he was the first overall pick in last year's OHL priority selection. Carson Carrolls, defenseman from Prince George, Alessandro Dioro, and Beckham Edwards, the forwards from Sarnia. Tynan Lawrence is a name people might not be familiar with since he's playing for Muskegon in the USHL, but he was the Clark Cup playoffs MVP. Ryan Lynn, Vancouver Giants defenseman, Pierce Bowie, OHL Rookie of the Year forward for the Owen Sound Attack. Mathis Preston, who won the WHL this year with the Spokane Chiefs. Daxon Rudolph, defenseman for Prince Albert, and finally, as we mentioned, Keaton Verhoeff, now with North Dakota in the NCAA. So you guys have commented on how the strength of this defensive group. Taking a look at Brock's projected roster, you guys kind of see a lot of the offense coming from the back.
Yeah, and I mean, this team's going to be difficult to score on. It really will. Like this, like Derek said, like this is potentially one of the better defensive units that Ken has ever sent to the Hlinka. And it's just a matter of finding a way to make all these guys gel because individually the talent level is through the roof. So it's about finding pairings that work, finding that chemistry within those pairings. You've got a lot of right-handed shot defenders, so who's comfortable playing their offside? Are there some left-handed defenders who are going to make a case to be part of this team to maybe push some guys out? You've got Carson Carrolls, who's basically the one top left-handed shot defender there. He's probably a lock to make this team just based on the fact that he's incredibly talented, but also, a left-handed shot on this team. That might mean guys like you've got from my region in Ontario, you've got Jacob Chu from Kitchener Rangers, you've got Callum Croskery. There are a few other left-handed guys in camp, but there's not a ton. And you'd have to think that HC Brass definitely has those left-handed defenders circled to see if they're going to be able to mesh within what they've got, and then they've got to figure out how do we bring these pairings together to bring the best out of these guys, right? All of them are incredibly talented offensively. How do we make sure that our own end is being taken care of and that these pairings sort of gel well together?
Just to close up, I want to ask you about a couple names I'm curious about. So, Ethan Belchetz, I've kind of asked around about this. I know Ryan Robrick obviously won't be at the Hlinka. He's a late birthday, but just two big guys in the in the OHL. Which one are you guys more favorable towards at this moment? I've seen them flipped, in all the 2026 draft rankings. They've kind of alternated. I think it's kind of hard to split those two.
Yeah, Rubric definitely seems to be ranked ahead of Belchetz more consistently. But personally, I would have Belchetz slightly ahead. I think that with him being a little bit younger and him being a little bit more physically assertive, I would say, I think that there's a little bit more to the power game upside and power game potential than you see with Rubric, who I think is more of a bigger guy who's incredibly skilled, who just happens to be big. I think that definitely can grow into his game, but I think that it's more natural for Belchetz to be sort of that traditional power forward, but he's also exceptionally skilled. I think that both of these guys are fantastic players. Maybe I'm just more magnetically drawn to the physical consistency that Belchetz brings to the ice. That's maybe a bias of mine.
Yeah, I would agree with Brock. Obviously, we've seen more of Rubrick to this point. He's a little bit more experienced, having two OHL seasons under his belt compared to Belchetz's one. But with Belchetz, I think there's just more of a unique element to him. Like, not just that he's a physical player, but the guy is like built like a grizzly bear. He's like, what, 6'5" and 220 pounds already. But he does have the skill to back it up. Like, that's a very, very rare package. You don't see a lot of guys who have that. And if everything kind of comes together for him, where he is able to play a skill game, but he's also able to really physically dominate with his size and his strength, that's a rare kind of player. And I think that's something that teams will be drawn to, even if he doesn't maybe have as strong of a draft year as someone like Rubrick. I think teams will just be interested in the best case scenario for Belchetz because it would be something pretty special if it worked out.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how that Windsor team shapes up this year. Who they get back and like they could be a powerhouse. The last names I would just want to ask you about. I'm not overly familiar with the USHL. I've seen a lot of analytics, NHL E models and stuff that have the USHL on par with the CHL, but Tynan Lawrence and Adam Valentini, two incredibly skilled guys, but it's kind of hard for me to gauge. Like, would you say it's easier for them to get away with those kind of high-end skill plays, and don't have to focus so much on the meat and potatoes game as a rookie in the USHL?
I watched a lot of the Clark Cup playoffs last year, and a huge Tynan Lawrence fan. Like you said, we only gave grades, but if I were to give a ranking, he'd be in my top five for this draft class. I expect him to come to camp and be the number one center for this Hlinka team. This is a all situations kind of guy, kind of like this year's Caleb Desnoyers. He's that sort of like mature two-way center, does everything exceptionally well. And his game is just screams 15-year NHL veteran, top end player. Valentini definitely, he's on the smaller side, so he's going to have to score to be on the draft radar this year. He's obviously got a ton of skill. Um, there were times where the size and strength of USHL players really gave him a lot of trouble last year. So I'm curious to see how the adjustment to the OHL goes for him this year, to see how he plays at this camp. I wouldn't consider him a lock, especially with him coming from the USHL. There's going to be a little bit of bias there with the coaching staff being a lot more familiar with the guys from the CHL last year.
Overall, the USHL has made a lot of progress in the last decade or so. It's certainly one of the stronger leagues out there for young players. I mean, I think if you looked at the pure numbers, like the number of players that they produce in the draft each year is pretty comparable to anywhere else. And you look at teams like Muskegon and Chicago. I mean, those are teams with a lot of success at developing prospects for the last few years. I mean, those are teams that just have a great track record. They've got great staff, they've got great facilities. Like you look at a guy like Lawrence, like he's getting a really good education at hockey, playing in an organization like Muskegon. He's learning how to be a responsible two-way player. I don't think he gets a lot of chances to cheat or anything like that on that team. So, like Brock said, I'm very excited to see what he can do at this upcoming tournament. I haven't seen a lot of him yet, admittedly, outside of the Calder Cup playoffs last year, because I was focusing more on last year's draft eligibles. But I'm very excited to see what he can do. I've heard nothing but good things, and just looking at like a loose look at the roster and who's going to be there. Yeah, I think he certainly could be the top line center. It's probably what people would expect, and I'm very curious to see what he can kind of do with that role. And yeah, if he does it well, I mean, that's going to be a great kickstart for his draft season. There'll be a lot of eyes on him.
Well, guys, it's an exciting time in Canadian hockey. If Gavin McKenna goes first and Landon DuPont goes first in 2027, as expected, that'll be five straight first overall picks for the Canadiens. I'm excited to continue to break down their games, once the season actually picks up. So I appreciate you taking some time out of your summer to scratch that hockey itch for me and the McKeen's Hockey Show fans.
Sounds
Our
good, Kyle.
pleasure.
Thanks for having. Yeah, our pleasure. Thanks for having us, and we'll have lots of hockey to watch coming up pretty quick here.